Within that 1 year ban period, number one, government would ensure that we restore all our water bodies. And there's technology available to be able to do that easily. Within 1 year under an Allen presidency, all our water bodies will become clean again. But meanwhile, you have a ban of 1 year, which means that within that period, it is not even possible for us to have our water bodies being contaminated again. But again, within that 1 year period, we are also going to establish a new framework to support young people who would have been displaced by this 1 year period. There's going to be a period where all the degraded lands now would then be restored. And that in itself is a major commercial activity, which the people, the young people in Galamsey now would have the opportunity of being part of the restoration. And that in itself is a commercial enterprise. But within that 1 year period, the government would also support the young people to establish their own mining companies. And this is where the proposal comes in. They'll be provided with machinery and equipment which would be used in a sustainable way. Right now, if you look at the implements that they use, obviously it is not the kind of instruments that they should be using for mining. But because the government is providing seed funding for them, they can buy the equipment that is appropriate for sustainable mining. But it goes beyond that. Government will also give them the working capital to be able to undertake sustainable mining, and also give them the licensing rights, both from the mining licensing rights and also EPA licensing rights. So it's a whole comprehensive program. I mean, I know this was not meant to be a discussion on mining and Galamsey, but because you asked about it. So the point about integrating young people into the new framework for sustainable mining, that point that you find in my 10-point plan is only one component of how we deal with Galamsey.
I'm going through your proposals here, and if I must be honest, one of the key proposals that resonates with me as a young person is your plan to abolish multi-year advance rent payments. As a young person living in Accra, I've had to pay upfront payment for as much as 2 years. But then here's a difficulty. We already have law backing and ensuring that landlords not charge more than 6-year rent. But then they do so nonetheless. And so there's a gap between the law and reality. How do you plan to bridge that gap?
Anytime there's a gap between the law and reality, the answer is very simple. Strict enforcement of the law. But if you look at my 10-point plan for housing for the youth, it goes beyond just enforcement.
Okay.
If I'm a lawyer, if you review the current legislation and regulations for housing, you find that they are not robust enough. They are not robust enough. So I've made a specific recommendation, and it says, introduce new provisions under the existing legislation and regulations on rent and rent control to abolish the requirement of multi-year advance rent payments for young people. See, there's a difference there, especially first-time renters. So it's a question of looking at the content of the existing law. Some provisions within the existing law you would enforce, but it also requires introducing new provisions, specifically for young people who will be first-time renters.
Now, for people watching on social media and also on all our platforms across the country. We're discussing Ghana's Rent Act, and the specific area we're dealing with right now is Section 25, subsection 5 of the Rent Act 1963, Act 220. It stipulates that landlords should not demand more than 6 months' rent in advance. But unfortunately, that is not being enforced based on what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what would you do differently?
Well, so I said first is enforcement, and then also the review of the legislation then specifies and places emphasis and focus on first-time renters. The construction of the legislation and regulations does not necessarily identify first-time renters or young people as a category.
Okay.
It's generic, of generic application. It doesn't really mean that it's only young people who have a problem. But the emphasis must be on young people because they are more vulnerable in terms of their capacity to mobilize funding. And so first is to enforce some of the provisions in the existing law, and then also to make sure that you introduce new provisions. But the beauty of my 10-point plan is that people rent only because they have no possibility of owning. If you can own your house, why would you pay money to a landlord? Now, if you read the first recommendation under the 10-point plan,
okay,
I said, develop a new innovative, affordable home ownership scheme for young people in employment through mortgage financing arrangements. I'm sure you are aware that in most of the matured economies, nobody puts fiscal cash down to buy property. All our relatives and our friends who live abroad who would tell you that they have houses. If you interrogate, these are houses under a 25 to 30-year mortgage. That's how it works. And so this particular recommendation is that we have a mortgage financing scheme that will allow a young person first to be able to own his own house. First year in employment, as long as you have a paycheck. So the key is making sure that they are employed. And that is what Alan Kyerematen's transformational agenda is all about. Putting people to work. Particularly young people. Putting young people to work. And I've made a commitment that I'll put 3 million young people to work within 1.5 years.
How?
I've created a youth digital platform.
Okay.
But let's escalate the point about housing. So, step 1, ensure that you create job opportunities for young people. Once they have an income and a paycheck, then you can bring them into this home ownership scheme. First year after school, you have a job, and then you can own your own house under Alan Kyerematen's presidency. It may sound too good to be true, but that's exactly what it is. There's absolutely no reason why we should be having challenges with home ownership. If you look at the United States, the strength of the economy for many years was based on two home and housing schemes that they introduced. Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac, people know this. And in most of the matured economies, housing and mortgage financing is a major part of their governance architecture. It's a question of leadership.
But how affordable would it be for a young person like me when we know we live in a country where affordable housing is hardly affordable for young people to purchase?
Yes. In any economy, there will be different categories of real estate properties.
Okay.
Luxury homes, affordable homes, different types of housing. I would say, elements. Now, for mortgage financing, if government is going to support the establishment of a mortgage financing scheme, then part of the condition is to ensure that the mortgage financing arrangement is first targeted to affordable housing schemes. Because remember, government is going to provide tax incentives or fiscal and non-fiscal incentives for this mortgage financing company. So government has an interest in providing those incentives. Therefore, it is appropriate for government also to require any mortgage financing institution to work with government to provide affordable housing. And it is absolutely inappropriate for government to believe that it has a responsibility for building houses. Yes, if you have the resources, as other matured economies have, there's no problem with that. But if you don't have the resources, incentivize the public, the private sector in particular, to build affordable homes. Why is government always interested in building roads, in building hospitals, in providing public housing? The fact that it is called public housing or low income or affordable housing does not mean that it has to be constructed by government. Government provides, I want to be clear, government provides incentives to real estate developers to build affordable homes. Government provides incentives for a mortgage financing institution to provide financing support for young people and other categories of citizens to be able to buy homes constructed by the private sector, which are affordable homes. That's the way forward. You know, it's a question of leadership. Sometimes we make things so complicated. Why are we not just even replicating what happens in other countries? There are people in this country who have been in government who know that is the way to go. So it is the quality of leadership and our political way and our capacity for execution. There's too much talk in this country. People talk and there's no action. That's why I said NATO. Ghana is gradually becoming a NATO country, not because we belong to NATO. No action, talk only. That's NATO.
Let's talk about what you raised earlier, your plan to provide 3 million jobs for Ghanaian youth and the system you plan to put in place to achieve this. I'm quite interested. Expatiate on that.
Yeah, if you look at my GTP, particularly under the industrial transformation cluster, I've made a bold proposal to diversify this economy beyond cocoa. Can we understand how over 100 years Ghana has not been able to think beyond cocoa? I mean, it's strange. Why are we unable to diversify our economy? So I have made a proposal that will introduce 10 new strategic industries, just like we nurtured the cocoa industry. And I'm not just talking theory. I actually put it into practice when I was Minister for Trade and Industry. One of those 10 new strategic industries was the vehicle assembly and automotive industry. When I started talking about Ghana assembling cars, there were many people who said, oh, it's not possible. We can't even produce toothpicks. How can we assemble cars? But without even borrowing a cent, just through policy, appropriate policy, mind putting it down, we were able to attract within 1.5 years 5 out of the 6 global companies in the automobile industry. It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. At the same time, 1.5 years, Toyota, Volkswagen, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai, Peugeot. And the interesting thing is that, again, for many of these companies, it's the first time that they would introduce 4 or 5 different models at the same time in one market. particularly if it's a small market. So there must be something about what Alan did with the policy to have created an attractive environment for all these companies to be competing. And so what I'm saying is that these 10 new strategic industries, one of which I've just described, provides an opportunity for new skilled jobs. It's already started. But it's not just that. It's not just the assembly. We are going to manufacture spare parts and component parts in Ghana under an Kyerematen presidency. It's already actually being programmed. Because very soon, Ghana would be able to produce its own steel, we'll produce our own aluminium, we'll produce our own plastics from adding value to oil and gas. Once you have steel, iron, plastics, aluminium, you can manufacture any components. So that's only one industry. Pharmaceuticals is another strategic industry. Ghana imports 70% of all our medication requirements. It doesn't make sense. Why don't we support the private sector to create new infrastructure in terms of pharmaceutical companies that can reduce the importation of medication? So if you have pharmaceuticals, you have the petrochemical industry that's adding value to our oil and gas. You have vehicle assembly. You have a new sector to produce garments and textiles for exports. You have a new sector that is going to manufacture machines and equipment like Korea does, like China does, like all these major countries do. If you have 10 new strategic industries all coming up within a matter of 3 years at the same time, but driven by the private sector with support from government, can you imagine the number of jobs that will be created? And that is why I don't need to wait till I become president before I talk about what I will do when I'm president. So I've already introduced this digital platform, which is going to be launched very soon. 3 million jobs. And it's a digital platform. And it means that young people have to profile themselves now on this platform to indicate, do you want to be part of the petrochemical industry in the future? Is your preference for the pharmaceutical? Do you want to be part of the new garment and textile explosion that is going to occur? Or you want to stay in the agro-industrial sector? So you indicate your interest now.
And then you'll be roped into the system.
Fantastic.
Let's move on to the creative arts industry. I'm going through your plan right now. You plan to create a creative industry fund to support young artists, filmmakers, and musicians, as well as content creators. That's quite interesting. How do we plan to get the money?
If you go into the details of the Great Transformational Plan, I've talked about creating a sovereign wealth fund. Ghana is not a poor country. We have created the conditions for poverty in Ghana because of corruption, because of failed leadership, and our inability to diversify our economy, as I said. So under an Kyerematen presidency, there's going to be an economic boom never ever seen in this country before. An economic boom which would then create new sources of income, which will now become the sovereign wealth fund. If you go to any matured country, they'll have a sovereign wealth fund. Now, once you have a sovereign wealth fund, which is the fund belonging to the people, not consolidated fund, this is a sovereign wealth fund, which government will use to trigger the growth of the economy in different ways. Part of that would be deployed to establish this creative industry fund. Because I understand the value of the creative industry. And that is why am talking about supporting young artists, filmmakers, musicians, and content creators in the literary arts. And interestingly, if you go on and read about my proposal, it says, host an annual youth arts and culture expo to showcase talents of young people. Look, anybody who has experience in the creative industry would know that for you to monetize your creativity, you need to showcase it. Once you create, you need to showcase it. And there has to be a government-facilitated platform for people who are creative to showcase their talents. And that is why this annual expo is going to provide an opportunity for not just young people, but all people in the creative industry. And when you provide that forum, an annual expo, supported by government, that is where the networking begins to occur. And the creative industry is about networking. And so but it goes beyond that. I've also talked about protecting the intellectual property rights of people in the creative industry. If you want to sustain interest in the creative industry, it's all about intellectual property rights. There are people, whether they are in music or in the film industry, in the creative industry, who have not been able to benefit from their creativity and innovation because there's no regime for protecting their intellectual property. And that's a responsibility of government. But the icing on the cake, if you go on to read this, I'm saying support digital content creators, including influencers, bloggers, and vloggers by facilitating access to training. Yes, you may have creative talent, but you can build on that talent through training and capacity building. And also global market exposure. I can put 1, 2 young people into the global film industry and you see what would happen.
So it's freebies for everyone, including those in the creative arts industry. As we wrap up the conversation, though, I'm looking forward to your performance in the December 7 poll. One of the biggest opposition parties, the NDC, they've raised doubts about the credibility of the voters' register. What's your thoughts about it? Do you have confidence in the EC?
The technical integrity and credibility of any election starts with the integrity of the voters' register. And whether it is internal elections in our political parties or it is the general elections, that is where it starts from. In my view, the Electoral Commission is doing a good job. I mean, I have a lot of experience in this regard, so I understand what they are doing a good job. But I think it is important for the Electoral Commission, for the sake of ensuring the integrity of the elections, to respond to the specific cases that have been identified about irregularities in the voters' register. And it only goes to enhance the credibility of the commission.
So you agree that there should be an independent forensic audit?
Yes, it has to be. There's no, I'm not sure even why there should be a resistance to that. Because, yes, the Electoral Commission has indicated that they've responded to some of those comments. But we have to put all reasonable, to put doubt beyond any that there's the need to have a credible voters register. So if there's an indication that there are still doubts associated with the electoral register, then let us allow an extensive, comprehensive audit, which can be done without any difficulty. And I think it will help improve people's perception of the credibility of the Electoral Commission. Look, I know if you compare the record of our Electoral Commission, in spite of all the negative comments that are made over the years, our Electoral Commission over the years has been one of the most credible in Africa. So let us make sure that we are not degrading their reputation, because that is also not good for our general elections. But having said that, it is a responsibility of the Electoral Commission to prove that the electoral register is clean and has no basis for complaints. And it's only through an audit that they should. And I'm very sure that all the political parties, independent candidates, let's remember, this is not just about political parties. I am making a commitment to ensure that Ghana transitions into a new political era where, for the first time, we have a non-partisan president. And this is going to be a first in Africa, a non-partisan president. Of course, it won't be the first.
It won't be the first, but then you plan to do it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have to go. My guest in the studio today, Alan John Kojo Kyerematen. For more news, please log on to myjoyonline.com. Have a pleasant morning as you enjoy the rest of our programs.